So, many of you are aware of Pew Research Center, or you've perhaps heard of them in passing. They do a lot of research polls in the United States regarding sociology in general, but a lot of times religion and religious thought specifically. And their latest press release, coming from September 13th, was talking about not a brand new poll, but they actually were using all their research methodology and all the data they've collected over the past century or so on religiosity in America and around the world to do some calculations and figuring out when exactly, if we follow the current trends of Christianity losing ground in America, when might they lose their title of having the majority of citizens in America be Christians. And it turns out, modeling the future of religion in America, if recent trends in religious switching continue, and we'll get to that in a minute, Christians could make up less than half of the US population within a few decades. The year they give, few decades, give or take, right? This is the way Christians talk about who wrote the Bible. A few decades, blah, blah, blah. What they're really talking about is 50 years. We're talking about the year 2070 as a target that under conservative and aggressive schedules, that by 2070, Christians should make up the minority in America as opposed to the majority. As any good research group should do, they talked about their methodology, this opening portion, and they do an introduction. Of course, Christians have been leaving the fold. They've been noticing that trend for a while. I'm one of them, though I'm not American, so I guess I don't contribute to these numbers, but I hope I contribute to these numbers a little bit. And they wanted to do some estimates. So in 2020, you can't see where my cursor is, but I'm pointing it there anyway. In 2020, about 64% of Americans, including children, were Christian. So that's a slight majority. It seems louder when it comes to politics, but it's a slight majority. Religiously unaffiliated, sometimes called the nuns, accounted for 30% of the population. Now that is up huge from around 50 years ago, where that was around 5%. So that's been a huge increase in my lifetime. What is religious switching? So U.S. Christians projected to fall. So anyway, they projected 4 scenarios on different scenarios of people switching or deconverting, or actually they include conversions to the religion. So any kind of switch from one ideology or one category of self-identification to another. So in the first scenario, the black line, where no switching at all. So imagine that everyone in America from now on stays exactly where they are, and the only thing to account for is new births and new people coming into the country. That is the top line, and by 2070, if there's absolutely no switching whatsoever, and I think they're making some assumptions based on previous data for the number of people who are born into a religion who continue to adhere to the religion. Of course, that's why it continues to drop. But if there's no switching whatsoever, from now on, 54% will be the number of Christians in the States, percentage of Christians in the States at 2070. If there's steady switching, as in if things happen at the current rate they are now, Christians will be down to 46%. If there's any kind of rise in disaffiliation, but with limits. So when they say limits, a growing share of Christians switch out before they turn 30, while a shrinking share of nuns switch in. But if the switching rate is capped to prevent the share of Christians who leave the faith rising above 50%. So basically what they're saying, they're accounting for a slight increase, but not a full-born, like in Europe, for example, once Christianity started sliding in the UK, it just plummeted, right? And the rates of people leaving exceeded 50%. So what Pew is doing here in this scenario with the width limits, they've capped the leaving at 50%. In that scenario, in 2070, 39% of America will be Christians. And if they take that cap off and just let it play out as if, it's going to be a avalanche. And of course, we know from social factors, we know that, once some of the peer pressure of remaining a Christian is removed or starts to slide, some of these things can snowball. Social trends can obviously accelerate. So in that acceleration rate, they're projecting that in 2070, only 35% of Christians would be, only 35% of Americans would be Christians. That's why I was slipping there, which is almost a swap from where the nuns are right now, right? The nuns, the non-affiliated. That's bad news for Christianity. Obviously, they're sliding down the trenches. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that, what is that going to mean for the people like myself who are not religiously affiliated? Because, of course, switching out of Christianity doesn't automatically mean you're switching to some form of atheism or agnosticism or just no religious affiliation at all. You could switch to another religion. You could become a Muslim. You could switch to a brand new religion, which is created tomorrow. Who knows? So they did actually the same kind of research or the same kind of scenarios for the nuns to see what might happen. Again, so there's a no switching option. There's a steady switching option. There's a rising disaffiliation with limits, a rising disaffiliation without limits. So the same parameters they put on the Christians are the same 4 scenarios for the Christians. If no new people switched into the nun category, that would grow from 30% to 30% now to 34% in 50 years. So obviously not a lot of growth there. It'd still be a steady growth over 50 years, but not. Actually, you can see on this chart from 1972, which is roughly 50 years ago, where it was 5% for the nuns. Now it's 30. So that kind of, with no switching, we're flattening out, right? The curve is flattening. If people are switching at the rate they are now, that would go from 30% to, in 50 years, increase by 11% to 41%. So again, even if we just stay at the rate of switching that we're happening now, the nun category doesn't become a majority. The nun category increases modestly, but we'll be at 41%, and perhaps the Christians will be around that same percentage. So the nuns and the Christians would be roughly tied in America, with the remaining 18% going to other religions. And we'll get to the other religion portion in just a sec. So if this trend actually increases at all, but with the limits, we could be as high as 48%. And if sky is the limit, if there's no factors too big or too small to be capped here, they're projecting that by 2070, the nuns would be at 52%, the majority in America. And if that was to happen, that would mean Christians were down to 35. Now 2070 is probably realistically outside of my own lifetime. Possible, not necessarily. I have some good genes. I had long living grandparents. That's kind of on the outside for me. But man, my kids could see a day where in America, there are more nuns than Christians. Now, the one thing that would be interesting, and the article specifically says it goes into it in no way, is the ramifications of this politically or socially, what all this stuff might mean. It didn't look at any of that. Now, would the nuns actually ever become a voting bloc? That's a whole separate question. It's tough to rally around the answer to a question of what religion do you adhere to? Nothing. It's tough to cohere around a lack of something as opposed to positive something. Nevertheless, Pew Research Center, a well-respected research center. Christians use this data all the time in their own studies. It's super well established as about a non-biased source on religion stats as you can get, telling us that in 2070, the nuns could be ahead of the Christians. That's a short time. I wouldn't have expected that to happen even close to my lifetime, let alone potentially on the edge of my own lifetime. That's pretty exciting. Let me just take a quick look at the rest of this. Oh, so here's another interesting chart. So here's comparing the 4 methodologies. So the steady switching, this says in graphics exactly what I was saying with words. I should have scrolled down sooner. Christians, in the steady switching, Christians at 46, unaffiliated 41. Virtual dead heat in 50 years. If there's any kind of rise at all, we're looking at a swap. So Christians in the red line down to 39, secularists or the disaffiliated up to 48. Boom. If there's without limits, it goes crazy. The nuns are 52, the Christians at 35. That's a worst case scenario if you're a Christian. Now, and actually this obviously isn't speaking for all Christians. I know that there are a lot of Christians out there who think that the current wave of people leaving the church or becoming a nun, deconverting, all these kind of things, is just separating people who are never Christians to begin with. That's what they say about me. That's probably what they say about you if you deconverted. And we're just getting rid of some of the chaff from the church pews, and they're fine with that. If you're fine with that, great. But a lot of us are thinking about, in America especially, how votes go, how public policy goes, and how human rights go. And I see these as human rights wins. That's where we're getting exciting. All right, and in scenario 4, again, the no switching whatsoever, even if literally like all status quo, no new converts either direction, we're still seeing this trend of Christianity is going down, the nuns are going up. Now you'll see in the bottom, on every scenario, they're projecting a 6% to 12% rise, from now 6% to 2020, 12% doubling of other religions. So adherence to other religions. I won't go and read all the details on that for you, but essentially in the study, what they did was they were looking at the current rates of people who switch from Christianity to another religion or who join another religion from the nuns. So that's one source of growth. But they were saying the primary source of growth for, let me go back to that, for the other religion category is through birth rates. Secularists tend to have fewer children. If your religion doesn't even matter what the religion, you actually tend to have more children. So there'll be more birth in homes that are religious affiliated, and also in immigration. When you immigrate to the country, you don't immediately switch to whatever, at least in America, you don't immediately switch to whatever the religion of your neighbors are. You carry that with you. Currently, if you're moving to America, the original your neighbor is probably Christianity, but in 2070, it's more likely that they will be not religiously affiliated. And that is exciting. And that is good news, at least if you are me. If you are a Christian, I'm sorry. The scenarios are against you. I did want to read one last quote, if I can quickly find it. No, I can't quickly find it, and this is dead air. So I will. Basically, the Pew Research Group said, of course, there are potential things that could happen. There are disasters. There are religious revivals. There are all kinds of war could happen. Like all these kind of things tend to impact the religiosity of a country. So if the United States, particularly if it goes through some significant hardships, could turn to religion once again in ways that are not predicted by these models, and that makes sense. That is potentially, if you're a Christian, one thing you might want to pray for is that your country goes through some kind of disaster or something, if your end game is to have a lot of Christians in the country. But what they also wanted to emphasize in the study is that they saw, while all these things are possible, revivals, all these things, they saw nothing in their data to say that such a wave or a tidal shift is coming from any direction that they can identify. So as far as they can tell, if the study holds, 2070 will be a banner year for people who don't adhere to religion in America. So congratulations, Americans, young Americans especially, who hopefully will be enjoying this in the 50 years from now, in their golden years. We're starting off with good news, as I like to do here. Whenever we can, start with good news. That's amazing. So what do you think of this study? Do you think that they have it right? Do you think they have it wrong? Do you feel like this is something to celebrate? Do you feel like the work is still ahead of us? We shouldn't rest on our laurels. What do you think? Let me know in a super chat if you want to talk about this change in tides at the end of the conversation, or if you're watching this on replay, let me know in the comments your thoughts.